Hey there, Doing the Mosters. I just wanted to start this video with a huge thank you. This week we crossed 1,000 subscribers. So thank you to all of you who have been subscribing for what feels like forever, and thank you to all the new subscribers who just joined the channel. Your support really does mean the world to us, and it inspires us to continue driving forward as we produce this Doing the Most kind of content as we're converting our new home into an urban homestead. And now back to your regularly scheduled video. On this episode of Doing the Most, we made a cherry mead, but now we need your help.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
Over the last few months, we've been working on this cherry mead made from fresh picked cherries. We picked these cherries off of a tart cherry tree owned by some of our family, and while it made an okay mead, we're realizing that it's not something that's going to be able to go into like 750 milliliter bottles. So now we're trying to think outside the box on what we do with 5 gallons of very tart, very cherry forward mead. But let's take a look at the process on how we got to where we are now. So the initial idea for this mead was to ferment 4 gallons of a relatively traditional mead, honey, water, and yeast. And then after primary fermentation, add to that a gallon of cherry juice and the gallon of water that's required for the cold maceration of the cherry juice. There were quite a few cherry pits left over after pitting these cherries. And we did a cold maceration, meaning we soaked the cherries, which had been frozen, thawed, and pitted, in very, very cold water for a few days with pectic enzyme to help extract the juice and the color from those cherries. This picture of the jar is an example from our Instagram, but we actually did the full 15 pounds of cherries in a brew bag in a food-safe bucket. So on brew day, we started by drawing 10 pounds of honey off of our bucket of wildflower honey, which fills up most of a gallon jug. And we rehydrated our yeast, which was D47, with Go Firm Protect. So with our yeast rehydrating and our mead mixed up, I went ahead and pulled our cherries out of their cold maceration and put them into my homemade fruit press. Check out the related video on how we made that fruit press. Then I dumped in the residual juice. Now to reiterate, the cold maceration was 15 pounds of cherries that had been pitted, put into a brew bag that was tied up with a knot and soaked in 1 gallon of water. These cherries expressed about 1 gallon of pure cherry juice, but because of the process and how we did that cold maceration, it looks like we got 2 gallons of cherry juice, but to be clear, it's diluted with 1 gallon of water. So the cherries in the bag go in, and I went ahead and started the press, and pretty quickly I realized I was going to need another spacer in that press to push the plunger all the way down. So I grabbed another spacer and put that in, and I was able to get quite a bit more pressure out of our fruit press. And after pressing all 15 pounds of cherries, this is all the pulp that was left. You can really appreciate here the work that the pectic enzyme did to break down those cell walls and help the cherries express all of their juice. This remaining cherry flesh is going into some cherry jam. So I racked the juice from that bucket off into these gallon jugs, and these went into the freezer until primary fermentation of that traditional mead was complete. And with this 4 gallons of mead, I went ahead and followed a Tosna staggered nutrient schedule to make sure that it fermented nice and crispy clean. And I let this ferment like I typically do during primary underneath a paper towel. This lets it breathe a little bit, and I don't have a lot of concerns about the negative effects of oxygenation during primary because the yeast are craving oxygen anyway. So in my experience, while the yeast is off-gassing CO2, an open ferment like this is not a big deal during primary. So once primary was complete and that yeast had all dropped out to the bottom, hydrometer was sitting at 1.000, it was time to rack off our mead. So I took our thawed cherry juice and put it in the bottom of the secondary fermentation vessel, and then racked the mead on top of that. And look at this color. I sent some photos out to friends, and it was really fun to see their reactions to this incredible ruby color. And now note that there's still yeast suspended in there, so it looks a lot brighter than it will look once it clears, as you can see here. So we gotta rack this off again now that it's dropped all this junk to the bottom. And again, I'm very, very happy with the color that this came out. Those of you playing along at home will take note that I did not do a hydrometer reading at the beginning. Running this through a mead calculator, we're looking at about 14% alcohol. I know I did a kind of unconventional process here, but I really wanted to add the cherry juice after the aggressiveness of primary had ended, so that way the residual sugars that were in that cherry juice fermented out nice and steady and slow as it crossed over the finish line. So as you've seen, this is a high alcohol content cherry mead. It is very tart. It has had no stabilizers in it yet, and it has not been back sweetened at all. And now that I think about it, we should probably taste it right now. So as you can see, it's crystal clear. It's got kind of loose legs. It doesn't really cling to the walls of the glass. It's got a wonderful red color, not super rich on the red side. You might compare it to a rosé that's been on the skins for a little bit longer than is typical. The nose is all acid. It's very, very cherry forward and kind of hot. It's got a bit of booze on the nose. Now, to reiterate, this has not been back sweetened, nor has it had stabilizers in it. Now, the intention behind that was one of the family members that owns the tree does not want to consume wine or mead that has sulfites added to it. So I was attempting to respect that, but man, I feel like it's gonna need some kind of sweetness. Let's go. It has a puckering sourness to it that is actually not overwhelming. There are definitely some of those fruity, rich cherry notes in there. I think they are covered up by just how much acid is on the front of that flavor profile. There's a lot of astringency there too. And I tried to avoid that by pitting all the cherries, but there's definitely a tannic quality that has come through. And maybe it's from that frozen and thawed fruit having so much contact with the pits. This is not unpleasant though. It's not as unpleasant as it was when I tasted it a couple months ago, but it does need something, and I'm not quite certain what that something is. So my thought initially for this was to split it across 2 5-gallon corny kegs and then dilute it with spring water and add about a pound of honey. So taking 1 5-gallon batch, splitting it into 2 2.5-gallon batches, and then raising those back up to 5 gallons so it wouldn't be as acidic and it wouldn't be as concentrated of a flavor, and it would have a nice rich honey flavor to kind of give it that boost on the back end. That said, I could also see a realm where we maybe pull a 1/2 gallon of this out, put a couple of pounds of honey in there to really amp it up, and then just bottle it like this. But I don't know, and I'm curious what your suggestions are. I'm gonna throw to the comment section. So what would you do with 5 gallons of tart and tannic cherry mead that has had no stabilizers added to it and no back sweetening? Let me know in the comments, and I'll probably pull from the comments if you have any better ideas than watering it down and throwing it in a couple kegs. As always, thank you for watching. You can find us on Instagram and Pinterest at DoinTheMost, and our website is dointhemost.org. And again, thank you to our 1,000 plus subscribers. Keep on doing the most. We'll see you next time.